Auburn is getting no respect from Texas A&M.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into a special Locked On crossover edition of Locked On Auburn and Locked On Aggies. I'm Zac Blackerby of Locked On Auburn. He's Andrew Stefaniak of Locked On Aggies. And thank you so much for making this your first listen every single day. We're going to talk about the very important matchup that happens late in the season between the Auburn Tigers and the Texas A&M Aggies. But Andrew, to start things off, when we saw some lines start to creep out of Vegas, pretty much across the board, this is a 3-point spread in favor of the Texas A&M Aggies. I don't agree with it. I see where they're coming from, but I do not agree with it. I think Auburn has done enough, and I think the home field advantage of Jordan-Hare Stadium should be respected a little bit more than we have. A&M saw that firsthand when Auburn was terrible a few years ago when they came here. I think Auburn should be favored in this game.
I look at this game and it's pretty simple to me. I think the disrespect that you feel Auburn is receiving, I think that Texas A&M is receiving it in other ways. And I look at this roster and I say to myself, you know, all you ever hear about Texas A&M is, oh, they lost everybody. There's no more 5-stars on this roster. Everybody's gone. It's not true. It isn't true. Mike Elko came in. Yes, he lost a Walter Nolan. He lost an Evan Stewart. He lost some former 5-stars, elite players. It's expected when you see coaching turnover. It's part of football, part of sports. But he held on to a lot too. He did a great job in the portal. And I find it funny that Texas A&M for years and years and years, I always put them in the same category as Notre Dame, as they're the preseason darling and it never seems to work out.
Sure.
And ironically, those two teams kick off the season against one another this season, so we'll see. But I think Texas A&M is kind of the opposite this year. I think they're being a little bit undervalued. So, and we'll dive into why. You know, I'll get into my why there, but I think that I don't know if I believe that Auburn is there yet. I have quarterback concerns. We'll get into that as well. So I think that I think Texas A&M is a better football team by a few points. I think if this game was at Kyle Field, it'd be 6.5 or 7.
Sure, but it's not, right?
Yeah.
It's at Jordan-Hare Stadium. So one thing you said, and you kind of brushed over it pretty casually, and I think it's a pretty big deal. You know, losing guys like Walter Nolan and all these studs, they're on the defensive front. I mean, your depth piece were guys like Isaiah Rakes, who's now at Auburn after, you know, spending 5 minutes, maybe had a cup of coffee at USC. But it's guys like that, the dudes in the trenches, that I think have been able to separate Texas A&M from other teams that are trying to fight and claw their way into the upper tier, maybe the top 2 tiers of the SEC. That's what's kept Auburn down over the course of this. It's been quarterback play and then just dudes in the trenches. Yeah. And Texas A&M has been so good in that front, on both fronts, pun intended there. And then to lose guys like Walter Nolan to Ole Miss of all places. What are y'all doing? And then, you know, even your depth pieces and your rotational guys like Rakes. I mean, there's just a lot that goes in to that. And so to me, like, you can add guys via the portal, but to just brush over like what's kind of kept A&M together during that Fisher era, I think that's a bigger deal than you may be making it.
So here's my pushback to that. And it's one name. It's one name. And it is Nick Scorton. I don't know if that name is circulated around to other places yet, but this kid, he had 10 sacks last year at Purdue. So we're not talking, you know, a small school.
Big 10, sure.
At Purdue. And he's a guy, lives close to Texas A&M, came back home. Mm-hmm. And I think he is going to lead the SEC in sacks. So I'll tell you this, and this is a bold take, and I've made it on my show before. I'll say it here in a crossover in front of the Auburn faithful. I think Nick Scorton is going to have a better season than Walter Nolan. I do. Don't tell Steven. Yes. Do not tell Steven. He'll come try and find me. But I think that Nick Scorton's going to have a better season than Walter Nolan. And it's a bold take. I know that's bold. But my point is, Yeah, you lose players like that. Now, the Evan Stewart, the receiver who went to Oregon, there's not an Evan Stewart in that room. So you didn't back that up. But Elko did it.
You know who else isn't in that room? It's Keandre Lambert-Smith and Cam Coleman as well.
Yeah, the Cam Coleman thing hurts because I talk about Nick Scorton a lot. I bet that you talk about Cam Coleman a lot because he is a monster.
I wake up thinking about Cam Coleman. There's no question about it.
Well, it's funny because it's how I feel about Nick Scorton. I mean, he's just he's awesome. I love him. But
don't you think that's kind of been what A&M has been able to? Because I don't think they were a well-coached team on offense. Anyway, I think their defense was solid, and you lost them. But I think Bobo was a fine hire on the defensive side of the ball. But just losing that star power and the depth both at the same time, that is a big deal. And sure, you bring in the guy that you're talking about, and sure, he may be great. He may be as good as you think he's going to be. But that's been the mismatch in my eyes for A&M, and I don't think they have that level of mismatch currently. I think they will with their resources and their NIL that they're throwing at players and all that. I think they'll be able to build it back up. But as of right now, this season, when we're talking about this game this year, I don't think they have it.
Yeah. I'll push back there too a little bit. I'm talking about Nick Scorton because he is the cream of the crop when it comes to the and you talk about trenches. There's two sides to the trenches. Offensive line, I'll be honest with you, I give a point to Auburn on the offensive line. Sure. Huge concern for Texas A&M right now is the offensive line. And it's more than a concern, it's a question mark. We don't know. They could be fine. They could be. But we don't know. You got a lot of moving parts. Your starting center decides to just randomly transfer like 3 weeks ago, and you're like, oh, wonderful. Yeah. So you had to go get a kid from Utah who started 8 games at Utah last year. He's a good player, but it doesn't have the familiarity with this system yet, with Coach Klein's system.
Sure.
And it's a concern. But defensive line wise, in all honesty, and I don't think they compare. I don't. I know that the Falk kid's pretty good.
Keldrick Falk. Yep.
Keldrick Falk. He's a great player. High upside there. But offensive line, I'd give a point to Auburn. Defensive line, I'd give a point to Texas A&M. But I think that the margin of those points when it comes to Texas A&M's D-line compared to Auburn's is wider than the offensive line. I think Texas A&M's D-line is going to end up being one of the best in the SEC.
Yeah, but obviously it's not Auburn's D-line and A&M's D-line that are playing each other. It's Auburn's O-line versus A&M's D-line. And we'll see how that develops over the course of the season. The upside for Auburn's O-line, I think, is very high. Connor Liu started a few games as a freshman a year ago. I think he's going to be a Remington Award finalist when it's all said and done. He'll be a true sophomore this year. Xavion Miller probably started a year too early. Started, every game in the SEC last year. JUCO product. I think he takes a huge step forward. And then they went out and got Percy Lewis, a guy who A&M's played against from Mississippi State. So I mean, they're good. I mean, I think the offensive line for Auburn is going to be good, and it could gel and improve over the course of the season. But that's just a projection and a prediction. We'll see. But yeah, 100%. I do think that will be a battle of strength on strength. I'm not disputing that at all. I just don't think the divide that what A&M has in the trenches versus what Auburn has had in the trenches over the last few years, because that's been the mismatch. I think even if you want to give A&M the slight edge, which I don't fully agree with, but I'll give it to you. That's where A&M's been so much better and like the series has been close. And so now the fact that I think Auburn from a recruiting standpoint has closed that gap, it's at home. Hugh Freeze has taken over the offense and they finally have receivers to throw to. And it seems like there's an offensive identity on the Plains for the first time in a long time, I guess 2017. To me, it feels good. So when you look at that November 23rd matchup between Auburn and A&M, to me, as we wrap up the first part of this conversation, I think Auburn should be favored.
Yeah, I completely understand, and it's in Auburn, it's in Jordan-Hare. I understand that why you feel that way, and I don't think it's a bad take. While I believe Texas A&M wins this game, I'm not sitting here saying they're going to win it by a substantial amount of points. I think this is going to be a dog fight. I think that Texas A&M is marginally better than Auburn, not a wide margin. Just I think they're a little bit better than Auburn, and you could make the argument that that having to play this game in Jordan-Hare makes it to where it's, it's even. And that could be true. But I just think Texas A&M is a better football team, not by a huge margin, and we'll get into it. But there's one position that is the most important position on the football field. I think everyone sitting here listening to this agrees on, and I don't know if I believe in who Auburn's got there when it comes to quarterback.
Yeah, let's head there in just a moment, as well as, I mean, there's so many weird connections in this game. There's a lot to break down, and we'll jump into that next, right here on this crossover edition of Locked On Auburn and Locked On Aggies. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. Andrew, can you imagine posting your job anywhere other than LinkedIn Jobs?
You'd have to be insane if you would really do that elsewhere. I mean, you got to, there'll be something to figure out. I mean, seriously.
100%. 100%. Describe the candidate you would get at a job board not on LinkedIn. Just real quick.
I'd say I'm highly unmotivated.
Yeah. Lazy.
Procrastination.
Doesn't like winning.
No. Loves to lose. Hates
not
to win.
Punctual.
No, never on time.
Give me a few traits of somebody that LinkedIn could help you find.
He's that type of guy that type of gal that I was going to say type of gal, type of gal that brings donuts and gets to work half an hour early.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Bring the lunch pail to work.
Yeah.
Factor.
First person in, first person out mentality. That is the person that you're going to find at LinkedIn Jobs. Simple as that's the candidate.
Yeah, it's the difference between getting Cam Coleman or not. I think that's an important note in all of this. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. You said it. The most important position on the field, doesn't matter what level of competition you're talking about, it is quarterback. You're not sold on Peyton Thorne, it sounds like.
I'm not. And listen, here's the deal. I think Auburn is banking on this, and this is a really fun conversation to have. They are banking on improving weapons. Improving weapons helps, of course. I mean, Cam, once again, I wake up in that kind of shake in the middle of the night from terrors of Cam Coleman not playing for Texas A&M.
I can't imagine what that's like.
Yeah, I know you can. I know you can. But, the point here is the weapons, we'll get into Lambert Smith. He's a great player. The weapons are there. I like the tight end, Fairweather. I think he's a really great player. The weapons are there. We know what you got in the running back room. Can Peyton Thorne do it? And it's funny. I've talked about for Texas A&M that position being the offensive line. If they are just fine, I think this team can be really good. Not elite, fine. Yeah. And I bet Auburn fans were having that same conversation about Peyton Thorne. He doesn't have to be Cam Newton. He just, he has to be second year Jared Stidham, maybe. I don't know about that. Maybe. But your point here is he has to be okay. He doesn't have to be elite. He has to be okay. And I think Auburn can be a really good football team. But you're going to have to convince me that he can do it. I mean, just what I saw last year, there were so many silly mistakes, so many poor throws. Some of it, I know there was play calling issues, but Zach, convince me that he's going to get it done.
I don't know if I can. I do think everything that you said, as far as what Auburn's banking on, I could see how it would fall into place of him just being fine. We've seen him be just fine or even good. His first year at Michigan State, his second year wasn't as good. Still had moments, still had throws. You're like, okay, this guy still got it. Then last year, the more you hear about how Auburn operated internally as an offense, both throughout game week preparation and then on the game itself, communication was non-existent. It didn't really seem like there was a whole lot of leadership from the staff in regards to what the offense needed to be, because Hugh Freeze was pretty hands-off. And then just putting my tinfoil hat on, it almost seemed like he realized how bad it was, and he's like, well, I'm just going to recruit. I'm going to let Philip Montgomery, last year's OC, kind of be the fall guy, and that's exactly what happened. But you've got folks, you got all these offensive players coming out, the media availability throughout spring, talk about how much different it is. Everybody's communicating better. I mean, so many different aspects where it's like they're not throwing him under the bus, but like they kind of are. We're all like, everybody's saying the same thing. We get what you're saying. And so we'll see what that looks like. They went out and got talent. Cam Coleman, can't stress that enough on a crossover with Locked On Aggies. Keandre Lambert-Smith, can't stress that enough. You guys offered him more money than us, and he still chose us, according to reports, which is incredible. But then like Sam Jackson, who I think could be a solid gadget guy. He came over from Cal. Robert Lewis, you can make an argument that he leads Auburn in yards and receptions this year. I think he's going to be fantastic from Georgia State. There's just a lot. I mean, the wide receiver room is going to be totally different, and it needed to be, Andrew. Like, it needed to be totally different from a year ago. But is that going to make Peyton Thorne great? Probably not. Probably not, but can it make him effective? He was a 60% passer a year ago. I think he'll stay around that mark, but I do think his average yard per attempt will go up, which is the goal. I think it's going to look more like a modern college football offense. Is that enough to make Peyton Thorne statistically, a top half quarterback in the conference? I don't know, but I could see it happening. I'm just not ready to say that it's going to.
It's a good argument. And I mean, the weapons are there. There's no reason to debate that. We all know how good Cam Coleman is going to be. I think the Lambert-Smith kid's really good. It's there. I think that, in all honesty, this makes Rivaldo Fairweather a better player for y'all, knowing what
Good
you
point.
have a receiver now.
Good point.
And I mean, you can talk me into it. I think Auburn's defense will be fine. I think that it's going to come down to Peyton Thorne in all reality. And I mean, we can sit here and we can go back and forth. You can share your thoughts, and yeah, I'm bought in a little bit more than I was after hearing you say all that. I am. But
so, as far as this game on A&M's schedule, I did a show last week, Andrew, the top 5 most important games. I think I had A&M as the second most important. Yeah. I had Auburn hosting Oklahoma 1. I think I had Auburn hosting A&M 2. Mm-hmm. Where would you say this game is it from an important standpoint on A&M's schedule?
I have it number 2 behind the Longhorns. And that is that's a home game.
Which is the week after Auburn.
Yeah. And that's a little bit of, that is something I'd be paying attention to as an Auburn fan too. Did the players, are they looking there? It's a rivalry we haven't seen in a long time, but it was a good one before it went away.
I mean, there's probably some pressure on A&M in that too, right? I mean, they left the Big 12. The rumors were partially to get away from Texas. They kind of had an SEC culture. And then Texas follows them, almost a decade later. A&M wants to win that game.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same as it's how I assume the Iron Bowl. Yeah, the Iron Bowl will be that following weekend too. I mean, Auburn fans know what it's like. It's a rivalry that people have forgotten what it's like because it's been so long. It's a really good rivalry, and it's going to be great to have that back just for the college football side of things. But yeah, I mean, there's some pressure to win that football game. And is that in the mind of the coaching staff, the mind of the players when they're making the move down to the Plains, the week before. So it's definitely something to monitor. But yeah, this football game, Texas A&M has a very manageable schedule. Auburn fans, I don't know if you've seen it or not, but your 4 most challenging games are all, against best opponents, are all at home. Notre Dame, Texas, LSU, Missouri, all home games. Your road games, Auburn, who I think is the best of your road opponents. Okay. Then Florida, Mississippi State, South Carolina. I don't really have many concerns there. Florida, maybe. But Auburn is the...
You think A&M's battle against Auburn and Jordan Hare is more important than A&M hosting LSU?
I do. And I'll tell you what. And the reason I believe that is because I think that Texas A&M has a chance to go 1-3 or 2-2 in those 4 home games I talked about.
Okay.
And if you do that, that makes the game at Florida in the Swamp and the game at Auburn in Jordan Hare incredibly valuable. I think you can win both of those games. I think they're both going to be dogfights. But I just think that road games are always going to take a jump for me, because it's just harder playing away from your fans. It's harder playing away from the 12th man. So that's why I have Auburn as the number 2 game. And in all honesty, when it comes to your shot at winning 8-9 football games, and this is, say what you want about Vegas and betting and all that, but Texas A&M's line instead of 8.5 for a reason. People do think this is going to be a solid football team.
Sure.
And to do that, you have to win these road games. I think if you lose at Florida or at Auburn or both those games, your chance of winning 9 gone. You have no
Yeah.
chance of it. So that is why they're so important to this football team.
Sure. There's one storyline in this matchup that I think is being under discussed. I want to hear your thoughts on it in just a moment, Andrew, right here on this crossover edition of Locked On Auburn and Locked On Aggies. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. FanDuel's America's #1 sportsbook. We've been talking about lines and betting a lot throughout this show, but can you imagine looking at lines anywhere else? Can you imagine it?
You shouldn't be. Once again, I mean, you'd just be crazy. I don't know.
Would make no sense.
Yeah.
Would make no sense. It's winner take all time, of course, throughout several professional sports. And so right now you want to be sure to check out our friends at FanDuel. They're giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/shot locked on to make every playoff shot count. FanDuel's America's #1 sportsbook. One storyline that I think is interesting in this is DJ Durkin. He's now Auburn's defensive coordinator, obviously spent time in the same role at Texas A&M. I think he's a really good DC. And you talk about the pressure and the desire to win and all that. We talked about the emotions with the Iron Bowl being the week after this, and then Texas A&M and Texas being the week after this. You got to assume this is the one DJ Durkin's going to want the most. Do you think that plays a factor in this at all?
I don't. So hear me out on this.
Okay.
I think it's a little different. I'm not saying no, because
Sure.
we've all been. Anybody that's played a sport, you always have some random stuff in your head. You want to beat somebody for some reason. It's reality. But Coach Elko is a defensive guy. So, you know what I mean? DJ Durkin is too good of a defensive coordinator to be like I'm the DC on a defensive-minded head coach's staff.
Sure.
So I think that's kind of why Coach Elko wasn't like, hey, Coach Durkin, you want to stay here? I think that it made more sense for him to go be the DC in an offensive-minded head coach's team, which is, I think, a better spot to be in. So, you know, I'm not saying no, but I'm not saying he's going to be like, all right, circle it. We're killing those guys. Write it down. Bang. Here we go.
Sure.
But yes, you could talk me into. He doesn't want to lose. He's not there anymore. It's reality. So yes, I don't think the motivation is high as if he got fired. You know, what I mean, he was fired, and so it's kind of like that for me. I think that, which I mean, I guess technically, you know, if your head coach gets fired and you move on, you're kind of fired. But what I'm saying is, I think that he's a solid coach that if Elko was an offensive guy, he would have wanted to hold on to DJ Durkin. There's some things, which you and I talked about on the phone when Auburn hired Durkin. Yeah. There were some secondary issues last year. There were some games during the year where you go, hey, DJ, Coach Durkin, maybe a blitz. You got a really good defensive line. How about we use them? Yeah. And I had some beef with him early in the year. And then he started to do what we were asking, and it was awesome. And Texas A&M leads the SEC in sacks. So that back half of the year, he was great. I thought he was really great.
How much of that do you think was A&M's personnel, which we talked about? You know, I kind of believe that that's been their mismatch as their guys on the trenches. How much of it was having Walter Nolan and some other big dudes up front that were good at what they do, and how much of it was a scheme, do you think?
I think every bit of that played a role. I do. I think DJ Durkin did a great job. I think here's the deal. When you have a defensive line full of 5 stars, it's hard to be bad. Let's just call a spade a spade.
Yeah,
it is hard to be bad. But I think Coach Durkin did a good job schematically getting players lined up, getting players, whether it's, you know, different. He got players in the backfield with his scheme. And I think that was very clear watching the game. Obviously, talent helps too, having good players doing what he's telling them to do. But I think DJ Durkin played a big role in it. And I also think he just had a really good defensive line. So, you know, and I've always said he's great with linebackers. He took this kid, Edgerton Cooper. He ended up being one of the first couple picks in the second round by the Packers. And I mean, he was a solid player before, but I mean, he just skyrocketed. So I think he can have a huge benefit for the Auburn linebacker room. I think that's definitely going to play a role. He's going to be one of those defensive coordinators that he's worked all over. When it comes to positions, he's not a guy he's a DC, but he's only a defensive lineman kind of guy. He knows it all, and I do think that's going to help him be a really solid defensive coordinator for Auburn. I think he's going to have a good year for y'all.
So it's so far from now, but any other thoughts on this this November 23rd matchup that's so crucial to both of these teams' seasons? Any other angle that we haven't brought up today, Andrew?
Well, I do, and you said it. It's funny how many we're crossovering right now and how many crossovers there are in this football game. I mean, Keandre Lambert-Smith, Cam Coleman, Isaiah Rakes, DJ Durkin. It's funny. It's a football game. I mean, maybe this turns into a little bit of a kind of somewhat rivalry after what happened with the Cadillac Williams game. I mean, that was crazy. They kicked Texas A&M in the face, and it was. I mean, that was obviously we were on the losing end of that, but it was still cool to see. But I think this is just a game. You said it right there. It's so valuable for both of these football teams. It is.
Yeah.
Both of these teams need it really bad. You know,
Wait,
I know.
You mentioned the win total for A&M 8.5. Auburn's at 7.5 according to FanDuel. Whoever loses this game, there's a good chance they don't hit the over on the season. I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about here.
Exactly. If you want to overachieve, you got to beat Auburn. And I think the same can be said. If you want to overachieve, you got to beat Texas A&M. So that's the value here. And once again, this could be a 2-hour episode. I mean, that's how important this game is. We could really sit here and break down position by position all day long. I think that Texas A&M has a slight advantage. And the reason I'm confident, the reason that I am confident is because of quarterback play. I don't think, listen, Connor Wigman goes down. He was not playing well, ironically, against Auburn. He was not playing well in that game. He was not playing well. The offense was not going well in that game. He's a star, and I think if he's healthy, I think you're going to see it happen this year. And if he's healthy, that's going to be when he's really hitting his stride back into the season. Same can be said for Peyton Thorne. I just think that Texas A&M's advantage at the quarterback position is going to be larger than I think many see it right now. And I think that's going to be the reason I'm taking the Aggies, even though I think that other position-wise, it's closer than you would think. I still think quarterback play will make the difference.
Sure. Andrew, for the Auburn folks watching, if they want more A&M content, how can they find you?
Yeah, you can follow me on X, Twitter, at Andrew Stefaniak. Check out my show, Locked On Aggies. And once again, there's a ton of correlations between these two schools right now. And, Zach, you and I will break this down again before the season. So you can check me out over at Locked On Aggies, anywhere you get your podcasts.
Yep. Same. Check out Locked On Auburn wherever you get your podcasts. Like the video. Please subscribe to either channel, and we will see you tomorrow. This has been a crossover edition of Locked On Auburn and Locked On Aggies.